Hey, this is Brandon McManus, Denver Broncos Super Bowl champion, and you listen to The Scoop on alscoop.com.
Everybody, welcome back to The Scoop, alscoop.com's podcast. I'm John DeCarlo, joined by Sam Cohn, Sam Newman, and a special guest with us this week, Varun Kumar. So excited to bring him into this week's episode because Varun is just one of the most fascinating human beings I know. I've told him that before. He's here to talk some hoops with us. We're going to talk about a couple of stories he's done. Yeah, he's been part of the series that we've been doing and the Remembering John Chaney series. We're going to talk to Mark Tyndale. A lot of you, any of you who are Temple fans know, he's been one of the better players in the program's history. He's now an assistant coach with the Toronto Raptors. And Varun recently spoke to Ron Rollerson, former big man, who was on the 2000 team. Was he on the 2001 team, Varun? Yeah. Okay. So anyway, introducing Varun to the podcast here. Sam, you're meeting him virtually for the first time. I want to tell this story about Varun, and he's heard me say this before. So Varun, how old are you now?
26 now. Took me
26 now. So Varun is a Pitt graduate, never went to Temple. And so I don't know, how long have we known each other now? 7, 8 years, something like that, maybe longer.
7 years probably sounds right. I think probably so when I got to Pitt, I think was when I started. I think we started talking. I think.
So I say Varun, and I know like a lot of our mutual friends share the same opinion of Varun, and I call him one of the world's like most fascinating people because I remember like Varun would start chiming in on tweets, and I was like, who is this guy? And I thought I was being trolled because he's younger. But Varun is just like this Philly basketball like historian, and he, would say, "Yeah, isn't that the game where Mike Vrieswick did this?" Or I don't know if he would go that far back, but they're like, "Yeah, that's the game where David Hawkins did this." And I'd be like, "How old were you?" And he would just play along. And then we finally got the chance to meet. So Varun, before we get into the all the rest of the podcast, tell our listeners about like how you got hooked on particularly Temple hoops. I mean, you've got a good grip on, the Big Five and college hoops in general. You've written for us, you've written for City Basketball Love, and you've covered the sport before. But tell us about how you just gained an appreciation for this sport, and particularly like the history of it for someone who you have memory recall on games that you never watched, but you just know the stats and you know the stuff. Just kind of fill people in on why you got hooked on Temple hoops.
Well, I would say that the way I got hooked was 2001, the last Elite Eight run for Temple, and also with basketball. It was the year the Sixers made the finals, so it was like really good time in Philly hoops. And my dad was a Temple grad. That's how my uncle taught there, and a lot of my extended family went there. So it was that was my intro into Temple, and it was a good time for basketball, and all kind of just came together with that 2001 Elite Eight run. And I remember it was even the quarterfinals against Dayton was like the first game I think that I was like, I really want to watch this game, right? And they come into that tournament struggling, not struggle, they've been playing better during the A10 run, but they really needed that to win the conference tournament to get into the NCAAs, and that 3-day stretch, Thursday, the quarterfinals against Dayton, Friday, of course, that game against GW when Lindgren gets fouled and hits those free throws, and then the title game against UMass. And like, that was for me, like I had been watching with my dad whenever he would watch before, or, any of those, when you're little, but that was the run that really got me into it I was 6 years old, I think, at the time.
Mm-hmm. So 6-year-old Varun Kumar hooked on Temple basketball, and Kyle and I will tease Varun, and our buddies Andrew Albert, Teddy Bailey, that whole crew, and Ari, like they all know you as well. Like, what was it, a few years ago Kyle and I were covering I think a Temple LaSalle game at the Palestra, and it's post game, and we're kind of like walking into the media room, and someone taps us on the shoulder, and we turn around, it's Varun, and it was like a midweek game against LaSalle. And Kyle's like, "I love you, buddy, but what are you doing here? What are you doing here? You're at Pitt." He's like, "I just had to come home and see this game." And we're like, the dedication is incredible. So we're happy to have him on with us again. We want to recap more of, just John Chaney's legacy. Before we talk about the Ron Rollerson story, before we started recording, obviously, I think anybody who's listening to this podcast probably, either might have been in attendance or had a chance to stop by and pay their respects to John Chaney, or watched the service online. It was beautifully done. And again, in case you didn't get the chance to see it, I would highly recommend going back and watching it. Sam, your impressions of it. I mean, Sam Cohen, before we started recording, you were talking about just the impact it had on you, not only just, watching it, but just being there in person. Again, I know all three of you never got to cover the man, but it's clear that, again, he's had this ripple effect and an effect on people who've, learned about him or interviewed people about him. What were your impressions of the service that they had for him?
I did get a chance to go to the public viewing earlier in the day, and that wasn't anything crazy to the sense that, like, it's not a lot around you're not around a lot of people, obviously, because of COVID, and it wasn't any sort of speaking or music or anything like that as the private one was. But I will definitely say it was a heavy moment for me to be able to. I'd gone with Ray, friend of the pod. I had been able to go inside, walk down the stairs 6 feet apart from everyone. Jay Wright was right behind us. Like, there were a decent amount of people there that were just kind of going through, and then there's barriers about where to stay, where to walk on the carpet, and then to be able to walk up to the casket and kind of have that moment to pay my respects. Even though I'd mentioned on the podcast last week that I had talked to John Chaney once in my life over the phone. I had seen him in my life once before at Aaron McKie's introductory press conference. John Chaney wasn't exactly the person to me that I know that he was to a lot of people, but, like, as you had mentioned, that ripple effect of what he means to Temple basketball, what he means to the Temple community, what he means to college basketball and to the Philadelphia community as a whole is unbelievable. And even just hearing all these stories, I think that definitely had put me into a different perspective going into that moment of being there for an open casket public viewing of John Chaney was a really heavy moment for me. But I think it was something I was glad I was able to go pay my respects. And then, I come home and I was watching the stream for what was it, like 2 or 3 hours. There were a lot of really awesome stories. I think you're probably, we'll get into the notable ones of Mark Jackson and Mike Frieswick and hearing Aaron McKie in a more vulnerable space, I think, talking about, like, Aaron McKie talking at a press conference, or Fran Dunphy talking at a press conference the day of and the day after John Chaney's passing, is you're going to get what you're going to get. They're going to say, they might tell stories but they're not going to get that deep. And hearing Aaron McKie be really vulnerable in a private viewing, after John, I think that was the first time I really heard Aaron McKie be vulnerable at all. And I thought he was one of the more underrated speakers. I thought he spoke very well, and he had some great stuff to say. And it was just cool to hear people kind of be in that moment and tell, like, really interesting stories and have that, like, you're telling me I got 2 minutes, I'm going to be here for a while. I thought the guy leading it, the pastor, did a phenomenal job. I thought, all in all, I thought it was really, really well done.
Yeah, obviously, Sam had the chance to go. I didn't. I was in class for 4 hours, Philly neighborhoods, my capstone. But anyways, I had a chance to catch some of it. Sam pulling out the program. But I had a chance to watch John Calipari speak, actually, and he was talking about how he wanted John Chaney to be there at his Hall of Fame speech, and John Chaney was basically like, don't ever let them, like, they're going to cue you to come off, but don't let them take that away from you. So, like, speak as long as you want, that sort of thing. I thought that was pretty great. And then just him saying, I mean, the story, obviously when it was first announced that Chaney had passed away, that one clip kept coming up of Chaney telling Calipari that it would kill him. And obviously I think it's great that, they became friends after that, very close. And, Calipari was kidding about it, but he honestly said he sat there. And I think the first time he's like, yeah, he would have kicked my ass. And I thought that was just kind of great. Played well on Twitter for sure. But it was just one of those things where it's like, wow, like, I mean, even when people have their differences, like Chaney behind the scenes was like with Calipari, they were able to reconcile and have a great relationship. And he kind of finished that off was saying like, hey, I miss my friend. Like, you know, that, I mean, that was pretty impactful. Obviously I can't speak to being there in person, but from the glimpses that, you know, you got to see from even a guy that he feuded with for, you know, a period of time, that was great. I saw some of the other speeches that we'll speak about, but only, you know, bits and pieces of it. So I'll let you guys kind of talk about that.
Well, I want to, talk about Varun's Ron Rollerson piece here. And again, I would definitely, if you haven't already, head to owlscoop.com, check out the content. Again, as we've mentioned, we've talked to all sorts of people: Dustin Salisbury, Chris Clark, Jason Ivey. Check out Varun's piece on Mark Tyndale; did a great job with that. Tom Magnuto talked to Mark Macon. We've talked to Sam Newman, talked to Nate Blackwell. Again, I mean, we could probably, tell these stories on and on and on for the next several years. You heard us. I got the chance to talk to Marty Collins last week. I'm not just saying this because Varun's on the podcast with us this week, but one of my favorite pieces was the one that he just completed for us, and we have it on the site today. And it's about Ron Rollerson, big man, 6'11", one of the biggest guys to ever come through the program from Pennsauken, New Jersey. And, statistically speaking, Ron's stats won't compare with Kevin Lai, with Lamont Barnes, with Mark Jackson, with Tim Perry, Ramon Rivas, Lavoy Allen, all the greats. But he had a role in this program, was on that 2001 team. And, and if you've read anything about him, Mike Jensen did a great piece on him a couple of years back. And if you read Varun's piece, did a terrific job. Ron's had some health issues and had either part of his leg or his whole leg amputated, Varun?
It was one whole leg, and I think a toe or a couple toes on the other. So, some really major stuff.
Yeah, and he's played. He played with the Harlem Globetrotters, and just a great personality, and was a fan favorite just because of like how big he was. But in Varun's story here, and again, it kind of follows the format of the other ones we've done, and there's some great writing here, and then some excerpts. One of the clips that we want to play for all of you from Varun's interview with Ron was, and again, other people have talked about John Chaney's impact when it's come to racial and social injustices. We know how outspoken he was when it came time to talking about Prop 48 between him and John Thompson, talking about it, and others. There's some great stuff in here that Varun got from Ron, where he talks about how John Chaney checked in on him when he was in the hospital. But the clip that we want to play for you here, and Varun texted me a few days ago and said, I got some great stuff from him. What really struck me was Ron talking about how these guys now didn't see some of the, and again, I'm paraphrasing here, and I'll turn this over to Varun in a second. These guys didn't encounter some of the things that John Chaney had to encounter, like during the Jim Crow era. And it was just a really profound piece of the interview here. Varun, you kind of want to introduce this clip, and then we'll play it for the listeners here and kind of react to it on the other side. What struck you about this piece of the interview when this came up?
Sure. I was gonna say, I asked him about his legacy, what it had been, and Ron really he went right away into this Jim Crow stuff. As he started off saying, like, he just wanted to be. Chaney always said that he always wanted to be someone who would be remembered as someone who cared. And then kind of going into perspective, it was because he came up during the Jim Crow era, where in Florida, there was over, at least reported, 300 lynchings. And Mike Kern did a piece in The Athletic when a couple of years ago, and Chaney mentioned that he had his mom had asked him to hide under a bed because the Klan had been nearby and was doing a cross burning, and all this really, really, really dark stuff, the ugliest sides of American history. And he was not afforded a lot of opportunity, simply by the color of his skin when he was born, where he was born. And it shaped the way he lived his life for 89 years from literally when he was born.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this clip we're going to play here is, again, just talking about, Ron's appreciation of that, and, just as Rune said, how it shaped him, and how, Ron, I think, and you reflected this beautifully in the story room, where like he still found it in his heart to take a look at the whole picture, and take a look at some of these guys from across all walks of life who helped him out: Sam Brown, Harry Litwack, Peter Leocoris, Jim Maloney. And this is a big part of John Chaney's legacy, the grand scheme of things, looking at things. And again, other people have talked about this, but to hear Ron Rollerson talking about it years later and how he remembers that piece of John Chaney's life was some really good stuff. So we're going to play this clip for you here, let you listen to this. Again, this is from Varun's conversation with Ron Rollerson, and we'll react to this on the other side.
I think this legacy will be exactly what he wanted it to be, although if you talk to him, he probably never felt that he made as much of an impact as he did. But Coach would often say he just wanted to be remembered as somebody who cared. And I think more than anything, that's what he'll be remembered for. Somebody who cared, and everything is put into perspective. He came up in a time during the Jim Crow era where, as a black man, he was told things you couldn't do. So for him, having the ability to take kids from the inner city and giving them a free education was an opportunity to do better for themselves and their family. Was like, it meant so much more to him than it did for us, because we were not denied some of the things that he was denied. So he took a lot of pride in knowing that he was giving people the opportunity to get a free education, something that so many people from his time, coming up probably in the South, were not exposed to. So I think his legacy will be remembered as someone who cared about his players. But he was definitely a whole lot more than that. You have to take into perspective what his eyes witnessed. He was born in January of 1932. Mm-hmm. He moved up here at 14. So when he saw coming up, he had more than every reason to let race dictate who he was. But if you talk to him, the most influential people in his life were people that, or a lot of people that did not resemble him. His high school coach, Harry Litwack, Mr. Leocoris, Jim Maloney, 4 people who probably had some of the most influence in his life resembled people that wanted to kill him at one time. Right. The average person doesn't forget that, nor do they forgive. So for him to, in his 89 years, and to have that kind of humility is something that's rare. Because, like I said, those individuals I named, he often always glorified, even going back to his Hall of Fame enshrinement speech. Those were people who meant so much and inspired him. Like, he took pride in knowing what Harry Litwack stood for, who started everything, basically. Mm-hmm. And then Mr. Leocoris took a chance on him, thought that the president, and his high school coach was so influential. And everybody knows in some community that Jim Maloney was his shadow until he passed away here. So these were people that meant so much to him, and he had every reason to never want to give his heart to other races based on probably what he saw and experienced growing up. And it probably wasn't much better in South Philadelphia in 1950 either.
Right. So obviously a really powerful clip there. Again, Varun did a great job with the story. Varun, you were obviously there talking to Ron. You heard the quote, heard that clip. Sam, when you hear that, again, some really powerful stuff there, some great perspective. What was your thought just hearing that clip?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is like, I hate to make comparisons, but like comparing what Ron Rollerson talked about in terms of John Chaney's legacy compared to the perspective that we've heard a lot of other people take. And I think just from talking to a lot of other people, like the initial perspective a lot of people take is like what he was able to do. And this is not a bad thing. It's not a slight at all. It's what they were able to do for them, their families and their teammates and the guys around them, and what they were able to witness for the legacy that he passed on. But to hear Ron Rollerson take a very different approach in terms of like what his legacy is based on who John Chaney was and what he went through, I think this was an exceptional answer. The line that really stood out to me was the idea of like he, as Varun mentioned, talked about the darkest days in American history. John Chaney lived through them, and the humility that he was able to show and the strength that he was able to show, and he had no reason to be that good of a human being because of what he witnessed and because of what he grew up through. But for him to be that strong and for him to be such an influential person for so many young basketball players and so many people, especially in the Philadelphia era, I thought was phenomenal. The line that stood out to me was when he said that the most influential people in his life were a lot of people that did not resemble him. His high school coach, Sam Brown, Harry Litwack, who was coach before John Chaney, Peter Liakoris, Jim Maloney, 4 people who probably had some of the most influence in his life resembled people that wanted to kill him at one time. I thought that was such a powerful line. Yeah. Thinking about like he had every right to hate them just because he knew what white people, how white people at that time felt about Black people. He had every right to have that in his heart and to have that hate in his heart. But those people took a chance on him, and he was able to be that. He showed so much strength, and he, having those people, I think, is just a really interesting perspective to look at it for like what his legacy means down the line after his passing. I thought that was just so phenomenally said.
Well, Sam really said it best there, and I don't really know how I can, back that one up. But I just going what off he said is, obviously this has been said a lot to us, but the one thing, that kind of pierced me. A ton of things did, but when he said, the one thing about John Chaney is he cared, and that's what everybody said. But Rollerson went beyond that to show that, he didn't really have a reason to care, but he did, and he had in his heart of hearts to make the world a better place for a lot of people, Ron Rollerson included. And I thought, the way that he went with that, wasn't really expecting Ron Rollerson's answer to be as extensive as it was, and to go in the Chaney's background and kind of point out that for his reasonings and, the fact that he doesn't need to, just with everything he was saying. So I thought it was very impactful. His answer was great. I think it's one of, like John said, it's, a little biased, but, I thought it was one of the best pieces for sure. And I know that, from talking to guys that I have, I wasn't able to get some of those answers, and what they gave me was still pretty good. But hearing that was just, it just elevates Chaney to a whole nother level that we already thought he was on.
Yeah. And again, when Varun, I think he texted me after he talked to him, he said, I got some really good stuff. And that's just really, really powerful stuff. And it's a perspective that, I think we've all thought about, and maybe some other people have written about it, but when you hear it, it really is great. And Varun, you got some other great stuff from Ron. And again, I would encourage you guys to read this story and all the stuff we've got on the site. Ron talked about when he was in the hospital in 2016, when he was going through that really tough time, having surgeries, and John Chaney was trying to reach him. And Varun, he said, the first thing he gave him crap for was not having his phone on, right? Didn't he say like, you didn't have your answering machine on?
Yeah, that was the first thing. He just, good old coach, like busting on him, just like nothing was wrong, and then immediately goes into like being super concerned about what's going on. But he didn't pass up a teaching moment at any point.
Yeah. So again, great stuff there. From a big thank you to Ron Rollerson for again just chiming in on our coverage. Big thank you to Varun for doing that story. Again, check out his story, the Mark Tyndale stuff, all the stuff we've been doing. Again, again, we could probably talk to people for, as I said, years on end about John Chaney and his legacy. But again, happy to provide some of this coverage for you guys. And again, a big thank you to Ron for talking to us. And stay tuned to the site. We'll try to reach out to more people in the coming days. Do want to talk about the current edition of the Owls and the scheduling switch ups that have taken place. So the home and home with ECU is no more due to, again, the wonderful world of COVID and COVID protocols and stuff going on with the ECU program. So instead, Temple will now be playing Cincinnati. You'll be listening to this on Friday morning. So Temple will be playing Cincinnati tonight, trying to get some revenge against the Bearcats. And again, Temple's just hoping to try to string a couple of wins together at some point and continuing to show some progress with a young roster here and some different pieces. Temple didn't get him the first time around. They're hoping to get him the second time around. It's a 5-7 Cincinnati team that's kind of rebuilding in its own right. Sam Cohn, I'll kick it over to you. What could Temple do differently? Can they win this game now? Again, it's, we know it's an interesting world for these guys to live in. This isn't the first time where they've had to pivot on their schedule. They're game planning for ECU, an ECU team that somehow beat Houston and upset Houston. So you're dedicating all your energy into looking at ECU. You shift. So now you're preparing for a Cincy team that you saw not long ago. What could they do differently? What should they do differently this time around? And do you think they could, beat them this time around?
I want to preface my answer by saying I did ask Aaron McKee a couple weeks ago about what's it like with all these schedule changes going into a situation like the one we have this week about, you have ECU coming up and the day before the game, they get postponed or the game gets postponed because the opposing team has to go through COVID protocol or whoever has to go through COVID protocol. Your schedule changes. You have to then prepare for another team. What's that like? And he gave an answer along the lines of it becomes less about the other team, becomes more about what do you need to do internally to win basketball games? What do you need to work on internally to fix things up and clean things up? The good thing for Temple is that they've played Cincinnati within the last week. So they kind of know what they're getting themselves into this time coming on the road. And the easy answer for what they need to do differently is not turn the ball over. Because if they don't turn the ball over 19 times against Cincinnati, what was it, a week ago today, something like that, they win that game. Plain and simple, they win that game. Their last two games, they've come down to late game scenarios that they haven't been able to finish. Caleb Battle missed a game winner, had a turnover and then missed a game winner in the first time against Cincinnati. Wichita State, similar situation, but I will say it was cleaned up a little bit. They did get a better look at the hoop with Caleb Battle at the end. I don't totally fault Caleb Battle for either of these losses. Obviously, there's a lot more that goes into it. He just happened to be the guy with the ball in his hands in the final seconds. But I think, plain and simple, they need to play as close to the way they played the first time around against Cincinnati, except they just need to clean up the turnovers. If they don't have those wasted possessions, like the possessions they had that they were able to get a lot of good looks at the hoop. They were able to really hang with Cincinnati defensively. But if they don't turn the ball over, that's a whole different game. And they're Cincinnati was taking at one point, like midway through the first quarter, Cincinnati had taken twice as many shots as Temple. And I'm going to start sounding like John Chaney right now, that they can't have wasted possessions if they're going to win games. If they don't get as many shots as the other team, they're not going to win games. So that's going to be the huge difference maker is can they keep up that defensive effort and can they maintain some kind of ball security to get those looks? Because when their offense is flowing and their offense is working, they can start to find a rhythm of knocking down shots. But if they're not even getting the shots, they stand no chance.
Yeah, just to piggyback on what Sam was saying, I think obviously there was a lot of unforced turnovers and something that, they can definitely improve upon, but they just have to shoot the ball at a better clip. Damian Dunn has been, done a great job of getting to the line, but he hasn't been shooting the ball that well from the field. Neither has Caleb Battle, who's really struggled from shooting wise. Temple just needs to go back to what's working, and it's, getting Jake Forster involved in the offensive end, the spacing, passing wise. I think Jeremiah Williams has been very good at, and Damian Dunn, even Brendan Berry, who has not, particularly done well from the stat box, but obviously, there's things that they need to be improving, but I think they've all passed the ball well at a reasonable clip. Getting Jake Forster involved in offense definitely helped early in Cincinnati. I believe, Sam, if I'm wrong, I believe Jake did get in foul trouble against Cincy, didn't he? Or is that if
I remember correctly, Cincy, he did not get in foul trouble, and Wichita State he did.
Okay.
if
Getting
I'm
my
remembering
games confused
correctly.
here a little bit. But yeah, obviously that's a key. Jake staying out of foul trouble. And then on defense, they just, the keys for Temple in them winning defensively is playing like they have been and limiting teams to like under 70 points. And that's really when they've been able to, but also winning on the glass. They did that against, in most of the games they've won this year, it's because they've won on the glass. And when they have lost, it's because they've been dominant. And it's as simple as it sounds. That's kind of the recipe for Temple's wins and losses this year.
Sam, I was wrong. He had 4 fouls with more than 15 minutes left in the game. So it was Cincinnati that he did.
Okay, that I remember.
Yeah, but just to that point, like if he's not staying on the floor, they're gonna get demolished inside, and they have to find a way to keep him.
And
on the floor.
that goes to the point on the boards too. They need to win the battle on the boards, and I mean we can say that beat the dead horse over and over again, and as simple as it is, it's like Jake Forrester is very key to how they're going to play against Cincinnati, because they kind of fell apart down the stretch. And I mean, since he has that 7-footer guy, Chris Vogt, who can definitely expose Temple down low if Forrester gets in foul trouble. So
he just does a lot. He just does a lot for their spacing offensively. Like JP and Dre aren't playing back to the basket, playing in the interior, playing inside. If Jake can just be on the floor in the interior and draw some kind of attention, they're going to be able to get passes through. They're going to be able to draw guys in defensively and kick things out. They're going to the ball's going to move a lot cleaner, and that's going to lead to better offense.
Yeah, and without Jake on the floor, you're asking a lot out of JP and Dre, which is
exactly.
It doesn't seem like the team has enough faith in Arashma Parks or Nick Jourdain at this point in their respective careers to get the job done against.
At least notable that we've seen more Nick Jourdain than we have in the last couple weeks. I mean, Wichita State, he got his first jump shot beyond 6 feet. Like he was able to knock something down. I mean, we've seen him after every single game getting shots up. He finally was able to get a clean look at the hoop. He got 6, 7, 8 minutes.
Aaron had a solid answer on him, and he said he doesn't want to put him in matchups that he doesn't think like he's going to win. So I guess that depends on whether we'll see him against Cincy or not.
Rune, although I mean you haven't been on the beat like Sam and Sam have, you're familiar with the program, you've been watching. What have you seen just from afar with what Aaron's done in year 2, the roster overhaul, changing the roster, bringing him some new pieces? Obviously, they're not going to be, unless there's some sort of dramatic turnaround, they're not going to be an NCAA tournament team this year. But do you think they're headed in the right direction from what you've seen with just some of the different players and the pieces that we're talking about here?
Yeah, I think, it's definitely Aaron, what he talked about, in the first couple of months about how he envisions where this program is going to be with, having multiple guys on the floor that can put the ball on the deck and play fast and, be long and, playing, 3-4 guards and going with a lot of this smaller, faster lineup that's like, quote unquote modern basketball with the way a lot of programs are doing, not the traditional, jump into the post bigs and, maybe even more traditional John Chaney offense. It's, it's not the way Aaron's going to play. So, Jeremiah Williams has been, really nice, bright spot for them. And, I definitely think they have, pieces there that can contend. And, it's been really tough with COVID when you work in a lot of new pieces. That's why like a lot of the teams that are freshman heavy have been struggling. And, I really, to me, wouldn't take away that much from anyone's win-loss record this year across the country, unless they, had like 5 seniors back.
Yeah, so we've got a few mailbag questions to get to basketball related. Varun, I would tend to agree with you. I think sometimes when you, before we get to the mailbag, one of the things that you said is, when you say this to fans, sometimes they call you a homer or they say you're being too kind, but I'd say this for college football, I'll say it for college basketball. Now, obviously a lot of good players out there, but when you look at some of the records this year and you look at some of the circumstances, it's just been obviously unlike anything we've ever seen. And I think if you're a Temple fan, and if you're the players and the coaches, you want to see signs of progress. You want to see wins. You want to see them bounce back. You saw some signs of progress against Wichita State, but they fell 3 points short there. They look better. It wasn't good enough. I'll be interested to see what he does with the roster moving forward, how some of these guys progress. But I agree with you. You look at a lot of records nationally and you think, what? I mean, even just looking at the talent that Kentucky has on its team, and for them to be struggling, relatively speaking, like they have, to see Duke and Carolina unranked. It's been obviously a weird year. We do have some mailbag questions to get into here. all basketball related. These are from our message board. I think we got one on Twitter as well. First one comes from TU1834 from the message board. Any names to look out for in the transfer market yet for that last scholarship? So again, just to recap, Brandon Sanders doesn't appear likely to head to Temple, although he had verbally committed. I would think that, as the question suggests here, that that they might be looking for a grad transfer. I mean, if I'm Aaron, which I'm obviously not, if you look at what Houston's been able to do, some other programs have been able to do, you've got Sage Tolbert on your bench. Will he play this year? Probably not. But, you look at what he could potentially add. Yeah, they probably want to add another big, but we'll see who comes back. We'll see, do Dre Perry and JP Mormon decide to come back for like that extra year of eligibility that they're getting? You have to look at the scholarship numbers and see how things play out. I don't know. I don't know if it's like a guy like, again, and this is all purely speculation. I think they're probably looking around, putting feelers out for any sort of big who could make an impact. I know that people are intrigued about Tosh Tweet down at West Virginia. Now, he's not a back to the basket big. He's barely playing at all for a very good West Virginia team. So, I think that if he decided that he wanted to come home, I think the Temple might consider taking him if there were like 2 extra available spots there. But, I think that they would have more interest in just getting, whether it's a shot block or any sort of impact big. Varun, you want to chime in on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I just think like with Jake Forrester, I think he's shown a lot of growth this year, and he's been really good the last 2 years at getting to the free throw line. If he can get to, 65% from the line, and then, kind of get the defense down solid with knowing the assignments and everything, Jake could be a really good switchy big. He's got the athleticism. I think if they get another big that's a grad transfer, Sage and Jake, like that, that looks pretty good.
Yeah, I think they're going to add a big. It'll probably be of the mold of Sage Tolbert. I mean, we've heard, that term junkyard dog, and to get to the mold of what Cincy has been in the past and what Houston is, I think they need to get would probably be looking for somebody of that mold, unless like, a 7-foot big. But we just don't know at this point. There's so much turnover that can happen between now and then, and Temple has no idea whether JP Mormon or Dre Perry or even, the future of some of their own players. So, but if I was a betting man, guessing man, I would say somebody more of the mold of the player that we've heard that Sage Tolbert can be, for sure.
I'll add one thing really quickly. I think that I agree with Sam. I think you're going to bring in a guy to the similar mold of Sage Tolbert. What happens with Erasmus Parks down the line, only time will tell. But I think that Nick Jourdain is a lot more similar to Jake Forrester than I might have predicted 6 months ago, 7 months ago, whenever he first chose to come to Temple. His game style, like when I had first heard about him, when I first talked to him, I anticipated someone that was going to play more on the wing, a guy that was going to play more. I pictured a Dre Perry. I pictured a different build in a guy like Dre Perry that doesn't necessarily have a jump shot yet, but like envisions playing that role. He is not that at all. His game in high school was strictly limited to within the restricted area. And we talked about when he went to something Covenant Prep, and I'm blanking on the name. Doesn't matter. When he took a prep year, he expanded his game a little bit. And it's a similar progression that we saw with Jake Forrester, with them wanting him to be able to take like a 12-footer, 10-footer, just to be able to kind of turn and face the basket and pull up. And he just add another like layer to that offense. I think Nick Jourdain is really going to grow into the similar path that we've seen Jake Forrester grow in. So that'll be interesting to keep an eye out for.
Yeah. Next question here from the message board from Sunny Owl. Question: do we understand that without a legit center, we're asking to be beaten inside every time we play? Sunny Owl sounds like a frustrated fan. Yeah, we get that. That's a big part of what we're talking about here. I'm sure Aaron McKee is aware that they need more help in the paint. Next question here comes.
Wait, real quick. Chris Vaught is what, like 6'11" on Cincinnati, 6'10" maybe, tall. who out-rebounded who in that game. Worth noting.
Yeah.
Worth noting.
Sam Cohn's setting me straight before I try to jet on to the next question.
Not to say, and that's not to say they need to improve their rebounding. There's still a lot to improve there, but it's at least worth noting that if everybody's involved in boxing out and attacking the glass, they can out-rebound teams.
Oh,
it's
like Houston. I mean, look at how Houston does it.
Exactly.
They don't do it with a pair of like 7-footers. So absolutely.
It doesn't necessarily come down to a legit center. Jake Forster very much helps keeping him on the floor. Having a legit center helps, but they can rebound the ball well if they, choose to.
Absolutely.
I've heard someone say that rebounding is a team skill, not necessarily an individual skill, which kind of, makes sense there.
Yep. Sam Cohn giving Vroon the thumbs up all the way from one end of the turnpike to the other, from Philly to Pittsburgh, the virtual thumbs up. Next question here from DBlaze75 is the screen name. And a lot of this ties into what we've been talking about already. Question number 1, any thoughts on whether JP and Dre come back next year or leave? I would imagine less playing time for both next year if they stay. Again, speculative stuff. If you're asking me, again, total guess, I don't know, maybe one of them comes back. We don't know. Understand why it's on people's minds. But again, you're adding Sage Tolbert into the mix. You're adding Jaleel White into the mix. Again, he's a guy who can play with the ball in his hands, but he can play kind of 1 through 4, maybe guard almost, at least all 4 positions or 4 of those 5 positions on the floor. You have to see how things go. I would guess that maybe one of the 2 comes back. Maybe JP, but again, I don't have any inside knowledge on that just yet. It's something that we'll obviously talk to Aaron about after the season. You guys have any thoughts on this one? Again, this is a 2-parter from D-Blaze, but the first question again involves whether JP and Dre come back.
I can take it. We had this conversation in our group chat separately, just about like what we think is potentially going to happen. Again, we have no inside knowledge of whether or not either of them are choosing to come back. They both have the ability to, because it's an eligibility for a year. But if I were to guess, I would say they bring back one and not the other, John, as you mentioned. And I adamantly think you could make the argument for either. I think both could be good additions to the team next year. I think just numbers wise, it's going to be really hard to keep both, especially with like guys taking a step forward, bringing back someone like Sage Tolbert, Jaleel White getting into the mix. I think it's going to be really hard for them to play the amount of minutes they're playing now next year. So I think you can make the argument that one will come back and not the other. And I think you can make the argument either way that Aaron McKee would be happy to have either of them back.
Second part of D-Blaze75's question. Is Temple's best option to get a big through the transfer portal? Seems incredibly hard these days to get a 5 or someone even a 4 as a high school signee. Yeah, I think we can all agree, again, aligns with what we're talking about. And again, we'll see what shakes loose in the spring. Maybe they do get a big from the area, or I can't really think of who off the top of my head, or maybe they do have their eyes on someone nationally, but I would be surprised if they don't address size, through the transfer portal. Again, Aaron realizes that he is rebuilding and retooling, but he doesn't want to be doing it forever, and there's there's that variation. I'm probably butchering this cliche, but it's get old, stay old, they want experience. They want someone who can come in and make an impact right away. I'd be surprised if they take a project big from a high school, in the late signing period. So again, I would agree with the sentiment there. Next question here. Eric Dixon is not getting any playing time at Villanova. Could you see him fitting in as a transfer if he goes that route? Was Temple involved much in high school? I'm sure Temple tried recruiting him. Eric Dixon, I think, was a Villanova lean for quite a long time. Can't say we really intimately covered his recruitment. I think what the transfer portal is doing to the fan base, which I understand, is, people are looking around and they're looking at box scores and saying who's not playing, who might not, who might be unhappy. And again, I think from the time that someone, and I'm getting this back to Eric Dixon in a second, but from the time that Tosh Tweet, committed to West Virginia, there are some people out there saying, well, he'll be home in a year, he'll be home in 2 years. And I'd be like, well, we'll see. Maybe he sits out his freshman year, maybe he plays sparingly his freshman year, maybe he does decide to come home. Nobody knows the answer to that other than Tosh Tweet. I don't know. Again, we don't cover Nova. Esther Boyer, I would say that I wouldn't necessarily look at Eric Dixon's playing time and automatically assume that because he's not playing right now would mean that he's ready to bolt Villanova. Again, have I talked to Eric Dixon? No. Have I talked to Jay Wright? No. We don't cover Nova, but I think you're dealing with a little bit of a different beast there. You got to remember that he's playing for a program that's won a couple of national championships. He's seen some guys develop. Don't forget, Jay's not, most of you listening to this podcast know Jay's not doing this with a lot of one and dones. Guys have kind of, developed over time. So I don't know that Eric Dixon would be just looking to bowl. I wouldn't necessarily be looking at box scores and assuming that he's leaving. But again, I also acknowledge that I don't know what I don't know, but I don't have any knowledge of him just looking to transfer. Now, of course, if he was looking to transfer, would Temple be interested? Probably, but we'll see. But I think this is what a lot of our mailbag questions are going to be like over the next several weeks with scouring the transfer market. You guys have any thoughts on this one? Nothing to add?
I do. Sorry, John.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, it was the same thing. I was actually, I'd seen a Facebook post about this earlier in the day, and I was talking with a couple of buddies of mine, and I was like, I basically said the same thing you did, but the only thing I will add is that Demir Cosby-Roundtree is sitting out this year, I think, due to a leg injury.
Yeah.
And he would be coming back. They'll probably lose Jeremiah Robinson-Earl. So, maybe, he kind of sees that he's going to be sitting another year behind Cosby-Roundtree. Does that play into it? Like you said, who knows? But, it's not like he might not be sliding into a spot next year.
Yeah. Again, it's like I said, I mean, that's a good thing to think about, Varun. I mean, it's going to comprise a lot of our coverage now in terms of like speculating. Again, we've talked obviously about how the transfer portal has affected college football, and it certainly has. And Temple has certainly borne the brunt of it. We'll see how it affects, things in the spring, but something to keep an eye on. It would be an interesting local story to say the least, but something to keep an eye on. Again, my educated guess would be that he doesn't go anywhere. But again, Varun gives us some good food for thought there. Got a question via Twitter, and I think that's it after this one, guys, right? Detroit Owl, will Ty Strickland be an Owl next year? Again, another transfer-related question. I get it. I see the thought process there. Again, I'm trying to be as literal as possible. We have not talked to Ty Strickland about this. I think he's a heck of a human being. I think he's a great guy. He's got some talent. But yeah, he's not seeing any minutes right now. You look at how Jeremiah Williams has played, Caleb Bowles getting minutes. Then when you look ahead and you think of, again, adding in Jaleel White, then you look at Hasir Miller and what he's doing at Newman Goretti right now. You can have this debate. There are a lot of good guards in the city. Hasir Miller is playing as well as anybody in Philadelphia right now. Posted a triple-double against Archbishop Wood, a team that's got a few D1 players on it, between Marcus Randolph and, of course, Rasul Diggins. I can see where people might connect the dots there. We'll have to see. I'm sure it's a popular thought. Don't know yet. What do you guys think of this one?
I think it's hard to say whether or not it's hard to say whether or not he'll be on the roster next year. It's hard to say whether he'll be playing. I think from an outsider's, I think if you're looking at it from an outsider's perspective, you have to keep in mind that he was their guy up until he had shoulder surgery. And when you watch his minutes that he got sparingly through the first couple games of the season, it's noteworthy that he did just about everything well except for his shot release. He couldn't find the bottom of the net. He had a handful of really nice moves with the ball in his hands. He had a handful of nice decisions. Was he a perfect guard? No, but I mean, who is after not playing for a while, after coming back from surgery or not having played in a live game in over a year? So I think it's at least worth noting that the shoulder surgery probably did something to his jump shot. How much you read into that, I have no idea, but I think it's at least worth noting that like he had a couple really nice defensive possessions. He had a couple really nice moves. He just wasn't able to put the ball in the hole. And when you can't do that, obviously you're not going to be able to get time on the floor.
It's also worth mentioning, as Sam has pointed out to us, is he was not dressed to play at Wichita State. So, that's definitely something we can ask Aaron about next time we get to talk to him. But maybe there's something going on there. We just don't know, and I think it would be premature for us to guess whether or not he'd be on the team. But if you're looking at maybe somebody who has seen, could see their minutes dwindle even further with the addition of Hasir Miller, that it would be him.
Yeah, I just hate chasing a guy before he's gone. And again, we talked to Ty last year for our podcast, and again, great guy to talk to. And again, he's got some ability. He was good enough to get a scholarship at Wisconsin. we'll just have to see. Again, I get why people are connecting the dots there. And again, it's a new era of covering college hoops, because if you're Temple, you also have to guard against who's looking to pluck guys from our roster as well. But I get why that's a name. Certainly keep an eye on it, but don't want to jump to any conclusions just yet. Thanks to everyone for the mailbag questions. Again, some great stuff from Varun's story, from Ron Rollerson. Varun, you had something else you wanted to add about that conversation real quick before we signed off here.
I was gonna say, like, kind of going off what Sam had said, like it was such a different kind of answer that Ron had given, just based off like the context. He looked at it from more of a macro perspective rather than the individual micro perspective that a lot of guys, what they had done for themselves. And I get why people would answer in that way, right? But Ron has always been someone that's like a student of the game, kind of like always loves his history. And something like he had mentioned to me when we were talking is that one of the biggest ways that he kind of bonded with John Chaney was that he would always try to get his hands on watching old games and talking about people like Sam Jones and Elgin Baylor. And John Chaney was really impressed with like how someone going to school in the late 90s, early 2000s is talking about guys from John Chaney's era in the 60s. So like just giving historical context with things like that, in viewing his life. Like I was doing the same thing too when I was on my way back to Philly for the viewing, and thinking about like the great, just with the Great Migration, with the way Black people moved from the South. John Chaney's story is as ordinary and typical of people at that time, and we know for his extraordinary career that he ended up having, but it had been such a typical experience for a Black kid moving from Jacksonville, Florida, in the second wave of the Great Migration, coming from an urban area. That's a lot of the movement had come from urban areas in the South in that second phase, and coming straight north. That's why a lot of people coming from the Atlantic coast moved up to Philadelphia, Baltimore, and stuff. And giving historical context really explains why John Chaney was the way that he was, more than anything. So I guess that's what my thoughts have been.
Yeah, some really cool stuff there from Varun. A cool conversation. Again, it's been fun. Again, not, sorry to do it under these circumstances, but again, I know I'm sure it sounds cliche and trite at this point, but again, every person you talk to, you realize how much this guy impacted so many people. And again, I mean, I would advise everybody, strongly encourage everybody to check out all the stuff we've been doing, from Tom's stuff to the Sam's here. And again, some cool stuff from Varun, some great commentary from Ron Rollerson. Again, we thank him for taking some time out to talk to us for that series. Happy to have Varun on this week, getting him into the mix on the podcast. Thank you to all of you for listening, and we'll have more for you next week. Have a great night, a great weekend, and we will talk to you soon.